Plato reveals how tyranny is born from chaos. This ancient lesson still applies today. In every age, when society loses its compass and drifts into confusion, it begins to prepare the soil for something much darker: tyranny. Plato, the philosopher, who saw beyond his time, identified this terrifying cycle of decay. How chaos does not merely destabilize a society, but opens its gates wide to the most dangerous kind of leader: the tyrant. His voice, echoing from centuries past, still speaks to us today with clarity, urgency, and a warning we can no longer afford to ignore. Plato saw tyranny not as a sudden event, but as the final act in a slow erosion of order and virtue. Democracy, he argued, if untethered from moral principles and true wisdom, devolves. When the pursuit of freedom becomes reckless and undisciplined, it breeds not liberty, but lawlessness. In such an environment, people begin to mistake their desires for rights, their impulses for truths, and their cravings for justice. The more they chase after personal pleasures, the less they recognize the need for self-restraint. Soon, respect for laws crumbles, authority is mocked, and the highest ideals are replaced by the loudest emotions. What Plato foresaw was that democracy, unchecked, becomes a breeding ground for tyranny. This is not a condemnation of freedom, but a plea for wisdom. For Plato, true freedom does not mean doing whatever one pleases. It means living in harmony with reason, with the soul, rightly ordered. When society loses this inner order, when reason no longer governs the self or the city, chaos grows. And from chaos, the people, weary and afraid, begin to crave a savior. They do not want the responsibility of freedom. They want relief from their fears. And so they look to the one who promises strength, the one who speaks with force, the one who mirrors their rage. This is how the tyrant is born. He does not arrive as a monster. He comes cloaked in the voice of the people. He promises protection, order, and power. But his goal is control. Slowly, subtly, he silences dissent, rewrites norms, and places himself above the law. He turns citizens into subjects, not through open violence at first, but through manipulation, by making people believe they are safer in chains than they were in chaos. This is the genius of tyranny. It uses the fear born from disorder to justify the birth of absolute rule. Plato teaches that the tyrant himself is the most enslaved of all. Outwardly, he appears powerful, feared, even worshipped. But inside, his soul is shattered. He is ruled by the darkest part of his being, his appetites. He is paranoid, restless, never at peace. The tyrant must control everything and everyone because he cannot control himself. He cannot trust others because he knows what he is capable of. And so, his entire regime becomes a projection of his own inner torment. What begins as a promise of salvation ends in widespread suffering. This ancient insight is not just a tale of the past. It speaks to our moment now. We live in an age of noise, confusion, and deep division. The institutions that once commanded trust now seem brittle. Many feel lost, unheard, and angry. In such an environment, Plato's warning returns with burning relevance. If we do not nurture wisdom, if we abandon the pursuit of inner virtue, if we mock restraint in the name of freedom, we too may welcome the tyrant with applause. Yet Plato does not leave us without hope. He believed that the soul, like the city, can be healed. The first step is self-knowledge. We must learn to govern ourselves before we seek to govern others. True justice begins with the individual. When citizens educate their desires, honor truth, and elevate the rational part of the soul, they fortify the city from within. No tyrant can rise in a people who are truly free. Free not merely politically, but spiritually, intellectually, and morally. The solution Plato offers is difficult, but not impossible. It requires education, not just of the mind, but of the heart. It demands that we ask hard questions, that we resist the seduction of easy answers, and that we pursue the good, even when it costs us. It means elevating philosophy above propaganda, truth above popularity, and character above charisma. In the final analysis, the tyrant is not the disease, he is the symptom. The true sickness lies in a society that abandons virtue for entertainment, that exchanges truth for comfort, that idolizes freedom while rejecting responsibility. Plato saw this clearly, and he calls on us to see it too. If we want to resist tyranny, we must first resist chaos. We must cultivate harmony within ourselves, and only then can we hope to restore it in our communities. This is not a message of despair, but of challenge. And if we are wise enough to listen, Plato's ancient lesson will not only make sense, it will make us stronger, freer, and more just. Because tyranny may be born from chaos, but justice is born from the soul that refuses to surrender to it. What if the seeds of tyranny are not sown by tyrants themselves, but by our own surrender to disorder? Plato understood this long before modern civilizations began to collapse from within. In the continuation of his vision, he warns that when a society loses its inner order, both at the level of the individual soul and the collective body politic, a tyrant is not imposed, but invited. He is summoned by chaos, given form by fear, and granted authority by the very people who dread his rule. According to Plato, the birth of tyranny begins with a breakdown in the soul. Just as the just society mirrors the just soul, a chaotic society is a reflection of fragmented individuals. In his famous tripartite model of the soul, reason must rule over spirit and appetite. But in a culture that celebrates unrestrained pleasure, where desire becomes the ruler and virtue is dismissed as outdated, the internal hierarchy collapses. The person becomes a slave to impulses. And when enough individuals descend into this inner anarchy, the city itself loses coherence. This is not merely a metaphor. For Plato, the microcosm of the soul and the macrocosm of the state are inextricably linked. He warns us in the Republic that a democratic society, if not guarded by reason and virtue, is ripe for demagoguery. In such a climate, people begin to crave a savior, not because they want justice, but because they want relief from the confusion they helped create. Tyranny, then, is not born from strength. It is born from weakness, the weakness of character, of leadership, of discipline. Plato describes the tyrant as the ultimate slave, a man possessed by insatiable desire, driven by paranoia, and surrounded by flatterers. He is not free. He is bound by the very passions he exploits in others. And yet, he rises to power because he reflects what society has become: indulgent, divided, fearful. Plato also reveals how tyrants use chaos strategically. The disorder that precedes their rise is not merely circumstantial. It is often stoked and maintained to justify increasing control. By presenting himself as the only one capable of restoring order, the tyrant wins the loyalty of the desperate. He offers simple solutions to complex problems, seducing the masses with promises of safety and stability. This is the ancient lesson we must remember. Freedom, when detached from responsibility and truth, becomes a breeding ground for tyranny. Plato warns that when individuals seek only their own pleasures, when citizens no longer care for justice, and when reason is silenced by emotion, a society creates the very conditions that make tyranny appear not only acceptable, but necessary. We are tempted to believe that tyranny is something that happens suddenly, but for Plato, it is a slow corrosion, a moral erosion that begins in the heart of the citizen. It begins when we tolerate lies for the sake of comfort, when we allow anger to replace dialogue, when we choose entertainment over enlightenment. These are not political acts alone, they are spiritual betrayals. So how do we resist? Not through rebellion against the tyrant, but through a deeper revolution within ourselves. Plato insists that the only antidote to tyranny is the cultivation of the soul. Each individual must learn to govern their own inner world, to subject their appetites to reason, and to align their lives with the good. The philosopher is not a politician. He is a guardian of the soul's architecture, And in a time of political collapse, his task is more urgent than ever. Education for Plato is not about filling minds with data, but about turning the soul toward the light. It is a transformation of vision, from shadows to substance, from opinion to truth. A citizen who sees clearly cannot be deceived by the tyrant's spectacles. He cannot be manipulated by fear, because he is rooted in something higher than the moment. This clarity of vision is the ultimate resistance. But education alone is not enough. There must also be courage. The courage to speak when silence is easier, to question when obedience is rewarded. Plato challenges us not just to think, but to act in accordance with what we know to be just. In a world that confuses noise with wisdom and visibility with virtue, the philosopher is often ridiculed, yet he persists because he knows that tyranny does not need force to thrive, only silence. The question Plato places before us is not how to overthrow a tyrant, but how to live so that tyranny cannot take root. This is a far more difficult challenge. It requires discipline, reflection, and an unshakable commitment to truth. But it is the only path that leads away from the abyss. In our modern age, where distraction is constant and outrage is currency, Plato's insights are not relics, they are warnings. When we sacrifice truth for comfort, or justice for expedience, we open the door once more. And every generation must decide, will we be guardians of the soul, or slaves to chaos? The ancient lesson still applies. Tyranny is not something that happens to others. It is something that grows silently when we abandon the inner work of self-governance. Plato calls us not to watch the world decay, but to become the kind of people who carry within them the seeds of renewal. Will we listen? Plato taught that the birth of tyranny does not begin with an external force storming the gates, but rather with the collapse of inner order. Chaos is not only a political event, it is first a spiritual and moral state. When the soul loses its internal compass, when desire overwhelms reason, when appetite silences wisdom, society mirrors this collapse. This is where the tyrant is born. Not simply in the palace, but in the hearts of people who no longer know how to rule themselves. In Plato's view, the decline of a state is intimately tied to the decline of individual virtue. In his masterpiece, The Republic, he explores how each political regime reflects a particular configuration of the soul. Tyranny, the most degenerate of regimes, emerges when the soul is ruled entirely by its lowest part, unbridled desire. The tyrant is the person whose inner life is in disarray, who has allowed the most irrational impulses to dominate. As more, citizens resemble this type of soul, the society itself becomes ripe for tyranny. This descent often begins under the banner of freedom. Plato warns that when a democracy becomes obsessed with liberty, when it mistakes freedom for license, it begins to unravel. Discipline is thrown away. Authority is mocked. Everyone does what they want, when they want, as they want. This appears to be freedom, but it is actually the breeding ground of disorder. In the name of liberty, the structures that protect the soul and the city begin to erode, and then comes the fear. Out of this chaos, people begin to long for order. They want security. They are tired of instability. They are ready to trade their freedom for safety. In this moment, the tyrant emerges, not as a conqueror, but as a savior. He offers promises of restoration. He speaks of unity, strength, and discipline, but his power is rooted in deception. He does not restore balance. He imposes control. He does not seek truth, he silences it. And the people, weary from confusion, follow him. Plato's insight is chilling because it is timeless. We live in a world that celebrates choice, autonomy, and expression. But without the guidance of wisdom, these values can decay into chaos. When every voice demands to be heard, but none seek understanding, the result is noise. When rights are asserted without responsibility, society fragments. This is not just a modern dilemma. It is the ancient crisis Plato described. To prevent tyranny, Plato does not suggest external resistance first. He begins with the soul. The person who can rule himself is not easily ruled by others. The citizen who disciplines his desires, who cultivates his reason, who seeks the good over the pleasant, this person forms the foundation of a just society. Tyranny cannot thrive where individuals live with inner harmony. But harmony requires effort. It demands education, not in the sense of acquiring information, but in the shaping of character. Plato's ideal education molds the soul, teaches it to love truth, beauty, and justice. This is why the philosopher, not the warrior or the merchant, is the ideal ruler in Plato's city. The philosopher is the one who sees beyond appearances, who is not fooled by flattering words or seductive pleasures. He knows what is truly good, and he helps others see it too. Still, Plato knew how rare such people are. The majority will always be vulnerable to deception. The path of the tyrant will often be more attractive than the path of the philosopher. One promises comfort, the other demands sacrifice. One appeals to the senses, the other to the intellect. One offers control, the other invites understanding. This is why true justice is fragile. It depends not only on institutions, but on people. On you, when you resist the temptation to indulge every desire, when you question instead of follow, when you prioritize truth over popularity, you push back against tyranny. When you develop your soul, educate your mind, and seek what is good, you build a wall against chaos. The tyrant is not just a political figure. He is the shadow in each of us. And the battle is not only at the ballot box, it is within. Plato's warning is not meant to instill fear, but to awaken responsibility. You are not powerless. You are not a victim of history. The system does not have the final word. The soul does. And as long as you have a mind to think, a conscience to guide you, and a will to act, you can resist the descent. So ask yourself, where is the tyrant in your own life? What desires have you allowed to dominate? What truths have you silenced? What freedoms have you abused? And more importantly, what can you reclaim? Plato invites you to a higher life. A life of order, clarity, and purpose. A life where the soul is no longer at war with itself. A life where justice is not imposed from above but emerges from within. Tyranny is born from chaos, but so is courage. The choice is yours, and the time is now. When a society loses its sense of order, of structure, of reasoned discourse, chaos creeps in, not as a mere accident, but as an inevitable consequence of neglecting the inner balance of the soul. Plato understood this deeply. He saw the collapse of democracy in Athens not simply as a political event, but as the outward manifestation of inner disorder. It begins quietly. People stop listening. They choose flattery over truth, emotions over reason, and ease over virtue. The soul begins to rot long before the city walls do. In this final part of our journey through Plato's piercing insights, we must return to the source of his concern, the soul. For Plato, every form of governance is a mirror of the soul. Tyranny, then, is not just a political failure, it is a spiritual one. And this is why his warnings are as relevant today as they were in ancient Athens. Let us ask, how does chaos give birth to tyranny? First, chaos is not merely disorder. It is the absence of shared meaning. When society ceases to agree on what is true, what is good, or what is just, it begins to unravel. In that vacuum, force replaces persuasion. Suspicion replaces trust. Selfishness replaces virtue. The people, exhausted by confusion, begin to crave clarity, even if that clarity comes from a single voice. And that is when the tyrant emerges, not as a monster at first, but as a promise of security, of stability, of restoration. He speaks the language of the people's pain. He offers to make things simple again. And for those drowning in uncertainty, this feels like salvation. But it is not. Plato shows us that tyranny is always a lie wrapped in comfort. The tyrant rises by feeding your fears, not your hopes. He isolates the wise, he flatters the masses. He offers pleasure, not virtue. He promises everything and slowly takes away your soul. The tyrant's power is built on the ruins of truth. He rewrites history, attacks philosophy, ridicules those who question him. He cannot tolerate thought, because thought threatens control. He surrounds himself with those who obey, not those who understand. And step by step he reshapes the world in his own distorted image. But the true tragedy is not the tyrant. It is the people who allow him to rise. Plato is uncompromising. The external world reflects the internal state of the soul. If people are ruled by appetite, by desire, by fear, they will choose a ruler who reflects those very things. The tyrant is a mirror, not a master. So what can we do? Are we doomed to repeat this cycle? No. Because Plato does not leave us without hope. The path away from tyranny begins within. It begins by ordering the soul, by cultivating reason, courage, and moderation, by embracing the love of truth above the love of power. This is not an easy path. It is not quick, but it is the only path that leads to genuine freedom. True freedom, for Plato, is not doing whatever you want. It is being ruled by wisdom from within. It is having a soul so well governed that no tyrant can rule you from the outside. And it starts with you. Ask yourself, do you seek truth even when it's painful? Do you resist the comfort of lies? Do you question power when it flatters you? Do you build your life on reason, on virtue, on meaning? These are not just philosophical questions. They are the foundations of a just society. Because when enough individuals awaken their inner philosopher, no tyrant can rise. When a society values wisdom over charisma, dialogue over division, truth over spectacle, the seeds of tyranny cannot take root. This is the lesson Plato begs us to remember. Not just in books, but in our daily lives. Tyranny is not simply imposed, it is invited. But so is justice, so is truth, so is freedom. And if we choose with courage and clarity to nurture our souls and reject the seduction of chaos, then Plato's vision lives, not in the past, but in us. So as you finish this video, ask yourself, will you be a guardian of truth or a passive spectator of decline? If this message spoke to something deep within you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it. Let others hear what Plato tried to tell us thousands of years ago. This ancient wisdom is not just for scholars. It's for anyone who longs for a better world. Subscribe to the channel for more philosophical journeys like this one, and help spread the light in a world that so often prefers shadows. Until next time, stay awake, stay thoughtful, and remember, the battle for justice begins within you.